Hello and welcome back to our journey through the scriptures. Today, we're diving deep into a truly powerful moment in the life of Abram. A moment that speaks to the very core of our own faith, doubts, and the incredible promises of God. Let's set the scene. Imagine Abram, later known as Abraham, fresh from a tremendous victory. In Genesis chapter 14, he has just defeated a coalition of kings to rescue his nephew, Lot. He's been blessed by Melchizedek, the king of Salem and priest of God Most High. By all accounts, Abram is a hero, a man of great courage and worldly success. You'd think he'd be on top of the world, celebrating his triumph. But that's not where we find him. Instead, in Genesis 15, verse 1, the scene shifts dramatically. It says, "After these things the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. The battle is over. The dust has settled. And in the quiet that follows, Abram isn't celebrating. He's contemplating. He's sitting under the vast, silent heavens, the stars scattered like diamonds on black velvet. And in this stillness, his heart is heavy. All the victory, all the wealth, all the respect he has earned feels hollow. Why? Because the one thing he desires most, the promise that beats at the center of his heart, remains unfulfilled. East noson noer, to carry on his name and legacy. This is such a human moment, isn't it? Have you ever been there? You achieve something you've worked hard for, a promotion, a personal goal, a victory of some kind, but in the quiet moments that follow, a deeper longing surfaces. You realize that what you achieved isn't what you truly needed. For Abram, the external victories couldn't fill the internal void. He had God's favor, Ayod wealth, Ayod status, but he was childless. The promise of becoming a great nation felt distant and impossible, and it's into the space of doubt and quiet desperation that God speaks. The voice of God comes to him in a vision, and the first words are profound. "Fear not, Abram." Isn't it just like God to know exactly what's going on in our hearts? He didn't say, "Congratulations on the win, Abram." He addressed the fear that was gripping Abram's soul. The fear that maybe God had forgotten. The fear that the promise was a mistake. The fear that his life story would end with him. God sees past the brave face we put on and speaks directly to the trembling heart within. He says, "Do not be afraid." And then he gives two incredible reasons why. "I am thy shield," God says. A shield is for protection. It's a defensive weapon used in the midst of battle. God is reminding Abram and us that he is our protector. After a great battle, Abram might have been afraid of retaliation from the kings he defeated. He was vulnerable. But God says, "I am your defense. I am the one standing between you and any harm that might come your way." This isn't just about physical protection. It's about spiritual and emotional protection, too. When we are afraid, when we feel exposed and vulnerable because our dreams haven't come true, God is our shield. He guards our hearts and minds. He is our safe place. Then, God adds something even more astounding, and thy exceeding great reward. Think about this. God doesn't just promise Abram a reward. He says he himself is the reward. This completely reframes everything. Abram was focused on the reward. He didn't have a son. He was looking at his circumstances and seeing lack. But God elevates his perspective. He says, "Abram, don't just look for the gifts. Look at the giver. The ultimate prize isn't a son or wealth or land. The ultimate prize is me." This is a game changer. God is telling Abram that having a relationship with the creator of the universe is a greater treasure than any earthly blessing he could ever imagine. It's a reward that is exceedingly great. It's abundant, overflowing, and beyond comprehension. This is a message for every single one of us. What are we seeking? What do we believe is the one thing that will finally make us happy and secure? A better job? A relationship? Financial stability? Those things aren't bad. But God invites us to see that he is the true reward. He is the source of all joy, peace, and security. When we have him, we have everything. All other blessings are just bonuses. The real treasure is God himself. But Abram, and his raw honesty isn't quite there yet. He's still stuck on his problem, and I love that the Bible includes his response. He doesn't just say, "Okay, thanks God." He gets real. He lays his heart bare. He replies, "Lord God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I go childless?" You can almost hear the pain and confusion in his voice. It's a bold question. "God, what good are all your other blessings if the one thing that matters most to me is missing? You say you're my great reward, but my house will be inherited by my servant Eliezer of Damascus, not a son of my own." This is one of the most beautiful and encouraging aspects of a relationship with God. He isn't offended by our honest questions. He isn't put off by our doubts or our pain invites Italiano. Abram doesn't hide his disappointment. He brings it directly to God. He's essentially saying, "God, I hear your promise, but I don't see how it can be true. Here is my reality. How do your promises fit into my reality?" This is a model for our own prayer life. We don't have to pretend we have it all together. We can come to God with our frustrations, our "but what about," ... double quotes, questions, and our deepest heartaches. He can handle it. In fact, it's often in these moments of raw, honest wrestling that our faith grows the deepest. Abram's focus is on Eliezer. In that culture, if a man had no children, it was common practice to adopt a trusted servant as an heir. Abram is looking at his situation and coming up with a logical, human solution. He's trying to make sense of how God's promise could possibly be fulfilled. He's thinking, well, maybe this is what God meant. Maybe Eliezer is the answer. He's trying to help God out, to fit God's grand promise into the small box of his own understanding. How often do we do the same thing? We hear a promise from God, but it seems too big, too impossible. So we try to figure out a reasonable way for it to happen. We create a plan B, just in case God's plan A doesn't work out the way we think it should. But God's plans are so much bigger than our plans. The story doesn't end with Abram's doubt. God's response to this honest cry of the heart is one of the most spectacular displays of his faithfulness. In all of Scripture, God doesn't rebuke Abram for his question. Instead, he takes him outside. He tells him to look up at the night sky. He says, "Look now toward heaven and count the stars. If thou be able to number them, so shall thy seed be." God doesn't just give Abram a verbal promise. He gives him a visual one. He takes Abram's focus off his one problem, his empty house, and puts it on God's infinite power, symbolized by the countless stars. This interaction teaches us so much. It teaches us that it's okay to feel fear and doubt, even after great victories. It teaches us that God's presence is our ultimate shield and our greatest reward, more valuable than any other gift. It teaches us that we can and should be completely honest with God about our struggles and questions. And most importantly, it teaches us that God's promises are not limited by our human logic or circumstances. When we see only barrenness, God sees a nation as numerous as the stars. So, what is the Eliezer in your life? What is the logical, human solution you've settled for because God's promise seems too far away? Today, I want to encourage you to be like Abram. Acknowledge the fear. Be honest with God about your disappointment, but then let him lead you outside. Let him show you the stars. Let him lift your gaze from your immediate problem to his infinite power and faithfulness. The God who promised Abram a son is the same God who is with you today. He is your shield. He is your exceedingly great reward, and his promises for you are still true. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this story has encouraged you. If it has, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more explorations into the incredible stories of the Bible. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What part of this story resonated with you the most? Sarai, my beloved wife, was a woman of remarkable beauty and profound wisdom. Her presence was like the first light of dawn, yet a persistent sorrow clung to her, a quiet grief that shadowed her days. For many years, we had longed for a child, a son to carry on our name, but her womb remained closed. The seasons turned. Years passed us by like fleeting shadows in the desert, and our home remained silent, devoid of the laughter of children. The weight of this emptiness pressed heavily upon us, a shared burden that we carried in the quiet spaces between our words. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, casting long shadows over our tents, Sarai came to me. Her eyes, usually so full of life, were clouded with a deep-seated pain. She spoke, and her voice, though soft, trembled with the weight of her proposal. "Abram," she began, her gaze fixed on something far beyond our tent walls. "The Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Our years are many, and still, we are without an heir." She paused, taking a deep breath as if to steady herself. "Behold, my mate, Hagar, the Egyptian. Go to her. It may be that through her, I can build a family, that I may obtain children by her." Her words hung in the air, a testament to her desperation and her love for me. It was a sacrifice born of a deep yearning, a plan forged in the fires of her own heartache. "To suggest another woman bear my child." The pain in her voice was a quiet testament to the depth of her sorrow. She was offering a piece of her own heart, hoping to mend the emptiness that had grown between us. I looked at her, my Sarai, a woman willing to set aside her own pride and desire for the sake of our lineage, for the fulfillment of the promise we so desperately clung to. I saw the conflict in her eyes, the flicker of hope warring with the certainty of her own barrenness. This was not a decision made lightly. It was a culmination of years of silent prayers, of watching other women in our camp cradle their newborns, of feeling the sting of a promise yet unfulfilled. Her proposal was a radical act of faith, but also a deeply human attempt to take matters into her own hands, to force a resolution to a divine silence she could no longer bear. She was trying to build a bridge to the future she was told she would have, using the only materials she felt she had left. And I, Abram, in that moment of heavy silence, saw the depth of her despair and the earnestness of her plea. The weight of her words settled upon me, a complex mixture of her pain and her hope. The path she suggested was fraught with potential for jealousy and strife, yet it was also a path she had laid out before me, paved with her own tears. And so, in the quiet of our tent, with the desert stars beginning to appear, I listened. I hearkened to the voice of Sarai, my wife, and agreed to her plan. I could not know then the tangled web this decision would weave, the new sorrows it would birth. I only knew that I was hearkening to the voice of the woman I loved, who was trying, in her own broken way, to bring our shared dream to life. Thank you for listening to this story. If you found this reflection meaningful, please consider subscribing for more stories from the annals of faith and history. Your support helps us continue to bring these ancient narratives to light. Have you ever felt completely lost, alone, and invisible? Like you've run away from an impossible situation only to find yourself in an even more desperate one. Imagine being in the middle of a vast, scorching wilderness, with no destination, no provisions, and no hope. This is where we find Hagar, a woman whose story from thousands of years ago still speaks directly to the heart of our own struggles today. Her name was Hagar. She was an Egyptian, a servant to a powerful woman named Sarah, the wife of Abram. You might know them better as Sarah and Abraham. Hagar's life was not her own. She was part of a plan, but not one she had any say in. Sarai, unable to have children, gave Hagar to Abram to be his wife, so that she could build a family through her. This was a common custom at the time, but customs don't always account for the complexities of the human heart. Hagar conceived, and with that, everything changed. A new life grew within her, but so did a new dynamic in the household. Suddenly, the servant looked upon her mistress with a sense of superiority, and the mistress looked back with bitterness and jealousy. The tension became unbearable. Sarai dealt harshly with Hagar, so harshly that Hagar saw only one option: to run. She fled into the wilderness, heading toward Shur, a path that led back to her homeland, Egypt. Can you picture it? The endless sand, the blistering sun, the silence broken only by the wind. She was pregnant, alone, and running from the only home she knew. She wasn't just running from Sarai. She was running from pain, from humiliation, from a future that seemed bleak and unbearable. She stops by a spring of water, a tiny oasis in a vast desert of despair. It's here, at her lowest point, that something extraordinary happens. An angel of the Lord finds her. Think about that for a moment. In the middle of nowhere, when she felt most unseen and forgotten, she is found. The first thing the angel asks is, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? This question is so profound. It's not an accusation. It's an invitation to self-reflection. The angel acknowledges who she is and the situation she's in. He calls her by name Hagar. He doesn't ignore her identity as Sarai's servant, the very role that brought her so much pain. He's asking her to confront her reality. Where have you come from? From a place of conflict and suffering. And where are you going? The truth was, she was just running, with no real plan, no clear destination. She was just trying to escape. Hagar answers honestly, I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai. There's no excuse, no justification, just the simple, painful truth. Then the angel gives her a command that must have been the last thing she wanted to hear. Go back to your mistress and submit to her. Go back to the pain, the humiliation, the harsh treatment. It seems impossible, cruel even, but the angel doesn't stop there. He follows this difficult instruction with a powerful promise. He says, I will surely multiply your descendants so that they will be too numerous to count. And he continues, telling her about the son she is carrying. You are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your misery. Let's break this down. The name Ishmael literally means God hears. At the moment Hagar felt most unheard, most invisible, God sends a messenger to tell her, I have heard you. I have seen your affliction. He's not just a distant deity. He is a personal God who is intimately aware of her suffering. The angel then gives a prophecy about her son. He will be a wild man, his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. This might not sound like the most comforting prophecy, but it was a promise of survival, of strength, of a future for her lineage. In a world where her own future seemed to have vanished, God was guaranteeing a future for her son and his descendants. Hagar is completely overwhelmed by this encounter. She has just met God in the desert. She has been seen, heard, and given a promise. Her response is one of the most beautiful and personal declarations of faith in the entire Bible. She gives a name to the Lord who spoke to her, Sikosim, L-R-O-I, which means the God who sees me. She says to herself, I have now seen the one who sees me. Think about the depth of that statement. In her moment of greatest invisibility, she experienced the profound reality of being seen by God. The God of the universe stooped down to a lonely, runaway servant girl in the wilderness and met her exactly where she was. Because of this encounter, the well where this all happened was given a name. It was called Bir Lache Aroi, which means, Well of the Living One who sees me. It became a landmark, a physical reminder that in our most desolate places, we are not alone. God is the living one, and he sees us. So, Hagar obeys. She finds the strength to turn around and go back. It couldn't have been easy. But she wasn't returning as the same woman who fled. She left as a desperate fugitive. But she returned as a woman with a promise. She returned as a woman who had been seen by God. She had an identity beyond Sarai's servant. She was Hagar, mother of Ishmael, a woman seen and heard by El-Arai. What does Hagar's story mean for us today? How many of us have found ourselves in our own wilderness? Maybe it's not a literal desert, but a wilderness of grief, of a broken relationship, of a dead-end job, of loneliness, or of despair. A place where you feel like you're running with no destination, just trying to escape the pain. Hagar's story tells us that even there, especially there, we are not invisible. God is El Roi, the God who sees you. He sees your tears. He hears your cries of misery. He knows where you've come from, and he is interested in where you are going. Like Hagar, we are often asked to go back and face difficult situations. God doesn't always magically remove us from our problems. Sometimes, he gives us the strength and the promise we need to endure them, to walk through them with a new perspective. Hagar went back. Not because the situation would be perfect, but because she knew she wasn't alone. In Italiano, she carried the promise of Ishmael and the knowledge that Ellery was watching over her. Maybe today you feel like Hagar at the well, lost, afraid, and completely unseen. Let her story be an encouragement to you. You are not invisible. The same God who met Hagar in the wilderness is with you and yours. He is the living one who sees you. He knows your name. He knows your pain. And he has a promise for your future. Sometimes, the greatest miracle isn't the changing of our circumstances, but the revelation that we are seen and loved right in the middle of them. It's the strength to face another day, knowing that Ellery, the God who sees, has his eyes on you. Thank you for joining me on this journey into Hagar's story. If this message resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more content that explores the powerful stories of faith. Have you ever felt like you took matters into your own hands, trying to help God's plan along, only to find it led to more complications? It's a very human thing to do, and it's a story we see play out with incredible detail in the lives of Abram, Sarai, and Hagar. Today, we're diving deep into Genesis chapter 16, a story of faith, impatience, and the profound consequences of human decisions. Let's set the scene. God has made a massive promise to Abram, who we later know as Abraham. He promised to make him the father of a great nation, with descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. It's an incredible, life-altering promise. But there's a problem, a big one. 10 years have passed since God first made this promise, and Abram and his wife Sarai are still childless. Not only that, but they're getting old. From a human perspective, the window of opportunity for them to have children naturally is closing fast. Imagine the conversations they must have had, the waiting, the hoping, the wondering. Sarai, in particular, feels the weight of this barrenness. In that culture, a woman's value was often tied to her ability to bear children, especially a son, to carry on the family name. Every month that passed was likely another reminder of what she didn't have, another little crack in her faith. This is where the story takes a turn, driven by desperation and cultural norms. Sarai comes to Abram with a plan. She says, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Now, to our modern ears, this sounds shocking, but in the ancient Near East, this was a known, albeit complicated, practice. If a wife was unable to conceive, she could give a handmaiden to her husband, and any child born would legally be considered the wife's child. The handmaiden in question is Hagar, an Egyptian. The Bible doesn't tell us much about her backstory, but we can infer she was likely acquired during Abram and Sarai's time in Egypt. She's a servant, a foreigner in a foreign land, and her life is not her own. She is subject to the will of her mistress, Sarai. When Sarai presents this plan, the Bible tells us, Abram agreed to what Sarai said. He goes along with it. Perhaps he was just as tired of waiting. Perhaps he thought this was a logical way to fulfill God's promise. So, Hagar conceives a child with Abram, and almost immediately, the plan starts to unravel. The power dynamics in the household shift dramatically. Hagar, now pregnant with her master's child, begins to look down on her mistress, Sarai. The text says she began to despise her mistress. You can almost feel the tension. Hagar, once a powerless servant, now has something Sarai desperately wants but cannot have. Her status has been elevated, and it goes to her head. Sarai is furious. She doesn't blame herself for the plan. She blames Abram. "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering," she says to him. "I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." It's a classic case of blame shifting. Abram, wanting to keep the peace, essentially washes his hands of the situation. He tells Sarai, "Your slave is in your hands." Do with her whatever you think best. This is a tragic moment. Abram, the man of faith, fails to protect Hagar, the mother of his child. He abdicates his responsibility. And Sarai, driven by jealousy and bitterness, acts cruelly. The Bible says she mistreated Hagar. The mistreatment was so severe that Hagar, pregnant and alone, runs away. She flees into the desert, a harsh and unforgiving place. She's running from her pain, from her abusive situation, with no clear destination. It's here, in her moment of deepest despair, that something extraordinary happens. An angel of the Lord finds Hagar near a spring in the desert. This is a significant moment. Hagar is a slave, a foreigner, a woman on the run. In the social hierarchy of her day, she is at the very bottom. Yet, God sees her. He seeks her out. The angel's first words to her are, "Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" He calls her by name, acknowledging her identity, but also reminding her of her reality. She answers, honestly, "I'm running away from my mistress Sarai." Then the angel gives her a difficult command. Go back to your mistress and submit to her. This can be hard for us to read. Why would God send her back to an abusive situation? But it comes with a promise. The angel continues, "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." This is a promise that echoes the one God gave to Abram. God is telling Hagar that she, too, will be the mother of a great people. He then gives her a specific prophecy about the son she's carrying. "You are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers." The name Ishmael literally means God hears. In her darkest hour, when she felt completely alone and unheard, God heard her cry. He saw her affliction. This encounter transforms Hagar. She gives a name to the Lord who spoke to her. She says, "You are the God who sees me," for she said, "I have now seen the one who sees me." She calls him El-R-O. This is the only time in the entire Bible that a human being gives a name to God, and it comes from Hagar, the Egyptian slave. In her pain, she discovers a profound truth about God's character. He is a God who sees the outcast, the afflicted, the forgotten. Strengthened by this divine encounter, Hagar does as she is told. She returns to Abram and Sarai. It couldn't have been easy. We don't know the details of her return, but she goes back and gives birth to her son. The Bible says, "So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born." It's interesting that Abram names the child, just as the angel commanded Hagar. This shows his acceptance of the boy as his son. At this time, Abram was 86 years old. For a while, it might have seemed like the plan had worked. They had a son. Ishmael was Abram's firstborn. He was loved by his father. For 13 years, Ishmael is Abram's only son. You can imagine Abram pouring his love and affection into this boy, thinking, perhaps, that this was indeed the fulfillment of God's promise. But there was always a shadow hanging over this family. Ishmael was the son of Abram's plan, not the son of God's promise. He was born out of human effort, impatience, and a lack of faith in God's timing. While God blessed Ishmael and promised to make him a great nation, he was not the child of the covenant God intended to establish through Sarai. This story is so rich with lessons for us. It teaches us about the dangers of trying to help God, of running ahead of his timing. Abram and Sarai's plan, which seemed so logical at the time, brought jealousy, conflict, and pain that would echo for generations. It shows us that God's plans are always better than our own, and his timing is always perfect, even when it feels slow. But perhaps the most beautiful part of this story is the character of God it reveals. In the midst of human failure and sin, God shows up. He doesn't abandon Hagar in the desert. He meets her in her pain, gives her a promise, and provides for her. He is El-Orai, the God who sees. He sees us when we feel invisible, when we are hurting, when we have been wronged. He hears our cries, just as he heard Hagar's. This story isn't just about ancient history. It's a mirror for our own lives. How often do we get impatient with God? How often do we cook up our own Sarai plans to get what we want, when we want it? And how often do those plans lead to unintended, painful consequences? The birth of Ishmael is a pivotal moment. It's a story of flawed people making flawed decisions, but it's also a story of a faithful God who works in and through our messes. He is a God of compassion, a God who sees, and a God who hears. And even when we take a detour, He is faithful to get us back on track and fulfill His ultimate purposes. Thank you for joining me for this exploration of Genesis 16. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives. 13 years had passed since the last time I heard His voice. 13 long, quiet years. I was 99 years old now, and Sarai was just 10 years younger. The promise of a son, an heir, felt like a distant memory, a fading echo in the wind. We had tried to take matters into our own hands, of course. Sarai, in her desperation, gave me her handmaid, Hagar. And from Hagar came Ishmael. He was 13 now, a strong boy, the light of my life. I thought, perhaps this was it. Perhaps Ishmael was the fulfillment of the promise. It wasn't exactly how I imagined it, but who was I to question the ways of God? I had made my peace with it. Life had settled into a rhythm. The days were filled with managing the flocks, the herds, and the household. The nights were quiet. The promise felt buried under the weight of passing years. Then, one ordinary day, everything changed. There was no thunder, no burning bush. Husta Sudan, overwhelming presence. The Lord appeared to me. His voice, a sound I hadn't heard in over a decade, cut through the silence of my heart. I am the Almighty God, he declared. The sheer power in those words, El Shaddai, the all-sufficient one, brought me to my knees. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement of absolute reality. Then came the command, walk before me and be thou perfect, perfect, blameless. The weight of that command was immense. How could I, a man who had doubted, who had tried to force God's hand, be perfect? But there was no time to ponder my own inadequacies. He continued, and I will make my covenant between me and thee, and will multiply thee exceedingly. The sheer gravity of his presence, the force of his words, was too much to bear. I fell on my face, my forehead pressed against the dusty ground, a posture of complete submission and awe. I couldn't even look up. Lying there, humbled and silent, I listened as God talked with me. His voice wasn't just sound, it was a creative force, shaping a new reality. As for me, God said, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations, a father of many nations. The idea was staggering. I was a 99-year-old man with one son from a handmaid, but God wasn't finished. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham. For a father of many nations have I made thee. He changed my name. Abram meant exalted father, but Abraham meant father of a multitude. It wasn't just a new name. It was a new identity, a new destiny spoken into existence right then and there. It wasn't a future possibility. He said, I have made thee. In his eyes, it was already done. He went on, painting a picture of a future so vast I could barely comprehend it. And I will make thee exceeding fruitful, and I will make nations of thee, and kings shall come out of thee. Kings. From my own lineage, the promise was expanding, growing more detailed, more magnificent with every word. And I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee in their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee, and to thy seed after thee. This wasn't a temporary agreement. It was everlasting, a perpetual bond between God and my descendants, forever. He would be our God, and we would be his people. It was a promise of relationship, of presence, of divine protection and guidance for all time. And then, the tangible part of the promise. And I will give unto thee, and to thy seed after thee, the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession. And I will be their God. This very land, the land I was wandering through as a foreigner, would one day belong to my descendants. An everlasting possession. The scope of it all was dizzying. A new name, a multitude of descendants, nations, kings, an everlasting covenant, and this entire land. It was almost too much to absorb. Then God spoke of my part, the sign of this incredible covenant. This is my covenant, which thee shall keep, between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every man-child among you shall be circumcised. It was to be a physical mark, a permanent reminder etched into the flesh of every male in my household and every male born to my descendants for all generations. It was a sign of belonging, a seal of the promise. It was to be done to the 80-year-old infant, to the one born in my house, and even to the one bought with money from a stranger. Anyone who is not circumcised, God said, would be cut off from his people, for he had broken the covenant. This was serious. This was a visible, costly sign of our commitment to him. A constant reminder that we were set apart. I listened, still prostrate on the ground, my mind racing to process it all. And just when I thought the revelations were over, God spoke of Sarah. As for Sarai, thy wife, he said, thou shalt not call her name Sarah, but Sarah shall her name be. Just as he had changed my name, he changed hers. Sarai meant my princess, which was personal to me. But Sarah meant princess or noble woman to all. She was to be a mother of nations. And then came the words I had waited a lifetime to hear, the words that seemed utterly impossible. And I will bless her, and give thee a son also of her. Yea, I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be from her. A son from Sarah. At 90 years old, the thought was so absurd, so contrary to every law of nature I knew, that an involuntary reaction escaped me. I fell upon my face again, but this time I laughed. It wasn't a laugh of mockery, but of sheer, incredulous wonder. 100-year-old man having a child. Sarah, at 90, bearing a son. In my heart, I said to God, shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old, and shall Sarah, that is 90 years old, bear? It was a question born of a human mind trying to grasp a divine promise. And in that moment of bewildered laughter, my thoughts turned to the son I already had, the tangible reality in my life. Oh, that Ishmael might live before thee. I pleaded, let him be the one. Let him be blessed. It was a father's protective cry for the son he loved, but God gently corrected me. His plan was specific, and it was unchangeable. Sarah, thy wife, shall bear thee a son indeed, he confirmed, leaving no room for doubt. And he even gave him a name, and thou shalt call his name Isaac. It means he laughs. God was naming our son after my own moment of stunned laughter, a permanent reminder of this day, of my human frailty and his divine power. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. The covenant line would pass through Isaac, the son of the promise. But God, in his immense grace, did not forget the boy I had just pleaded for. And as for Ishmael, I have heard thee, Aside, keenly. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. Ishmael would be blessed. He would be great. He would be a father to princes. My prayer for him was answered. God is so generous. He didn't replace one blessing with another. He added blessing upon blessing. But, he clarified, my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this set time in the next year. The timeline was set. 1 year. The impossible would happen within 1 year. And when he had finished talking with me, God went up from me. The overwhelming presence lifted, and I was left alone again in the quiet of the afternoon. The dust on my face, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilarating joy. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the empty silence of the past 13 years. It was a silence filled with purpose, with a promise so concrete it had a name and a due date. I didn't hesitate. The command was clear. That very same day, I rose from the ground, my old bones aching but my spirit renewed. I gathered my son, Ishmael, and all the men of my household, those born in my house, and those bought with my money. Every single one. And just as God had commanded me, I administered the sign of the covenant. I, at 99 years old, and my son Ishmael, at 13, along with every male in my camp, were circumcised that day. It was an act of immediate, unqualified obedience. It was the physical seal of a spiritual reality. My name was Abraham, and Sarah, my wife, would bear a son. Have you ever had a day so ordinary it felt like any other? A day where the sun beat down, the air was still, and you were just going about your business, expecting nothing out of the ordinary? That's exactly where our story begins today, with one of the most pivotal figures in history, Abraham. He's sitting at the entrance of his tent, trying to escape the blistering heat of the midday sun near the great oaks of Mamre. Life is routine. He's a wealthy man, a respected leader, but there's a deep, unspoken ache in his heart, and in the heart of his wife. Sarah, the promise of a son, an heir, a nation, feels like a distant, fading dream. He's 99 years old. Sarah is 90. The biological clock, for all intents and purposes, has stopped ticking. Hope, you could say, was on life support. And then, in the shimmering heat haze, he sees them. 3 men, just standing there. They seem to have appeared out of nowhere. Now, in our modern world, we might be cautious. We might lock the door or peek through the blinds. But Abraham's reaction is the complete opposite. He doesn't hesitate. He doesn't wait for them to approach him. He runs. Imagine this elderly man, a respected patriarch, sprinting from his tent door to meet these strangers. He doesn't just greet them. He bows low to the ground, a profound gesture of respect and humility. He addresses one of them, "My lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant." He immediately recognizes something special, something divine, in their presence. Abraham's hospitality is extravagant, almost over the top. He insists they stay. "Let a little water be brought," he says, "and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat, so you can be refreshed, and then go on your way now that you have come to your servant." It's a beautiful picture of Middle Eastern hospitality, where a guest is treated with the utmost honor. He offers a morsel of bread, a humble understatement for what he's about to prepare. They agree to his proposal, and Abraham rushes back to the tent. A man on a mission. This isn't just a polite gesture. It's an urgent, heartfelt welcome. He bursts into the tent and tells Sarah, "Quick! Get 3 seahs of the finest flour and knead it and bake some bread." 3 seahs is a huge amount of flour, enough to bake dozens of loaves of bread. This is not a small snack, it's a feast. But he's not done. He then runs to the herd and selects a choice, tender calf, giving it to a servant to prepare quickly. He's pulling out all the stops. He also brings curds and milk, the ancient equivalent of the finest dairy. He takes all of this to freshly baked bread, the roasted calf, the milk and curds, and sets it before the 3 men under the tree. And as they ate, Abraham stood by them, attending to their needs, serving them. He, the master of this great household, is acting as their waiter. This scene is so rich. It shows us the character of Abraham's generosity, his humility, his attentiveness. He sees strangers and treats them like royalty, not knowing for sure who they are, but sensing their importance. It's a powerful lesson in how we should treat others, seeing the divine potential in every encounter. In a world that often encourages suspicion and self-preservation, Abraham's open-hearted welcome is a radical act of faith and kindness. He gives his absolute best without a second thought, without expecting anything in return. He's simply honoring his guests, and it is in this act of selfless hospitality that the stage is set for a miracle that will change the course of human history. As they finish their meal, the men ask a simple question. "Where's your wife, Sarah?" A seemingly casual question, but it's targeted. It's specific. They know her name. Abraham replies, there in the tent. Then, one of the men, who the text now clearly identifies as the Lord, makes an announcement that shatters the afternoon's quiet routine. I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son who's like that. A direct, unambiguous promise. The very thing Abraham and Sarah had longed for, prayed for, and eventually given up on, is spoken into existence as a matter of fact. The impossible is declared possible. Now, Sarah was inside the tent, just behind the entrance, and she heard everything. What's her reaction? She laughs, but it's not a laugh of joy or excitement. It's a silent, internal laugh of pure disbelief and cynicism. The scripture tells us her thoughts. After I am worn out, and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure? Her laughter is rooted in reality, in her physical condition. She and Abraham were, as the Bible says, old and well advanced in years, and she was past the age of childbearing. From a human perspective, the promise was absurd. It was biologically impossible. It was laughable. It's a very human reaction, isn't it? How many times have we heard a promise from God or felt a nudge in a certain direction, and our first internal reaction is a cynical laugh? Yeah, right. Me. No way. Sarah's laugh is the sound of a heart that has protected itself from further disappointment for too long. But God hears the silent laugh. He hears the thoughts of the heart. He turns to Abraham and asks, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Will I really have a child, now that I am old?'" He confronts the doubt head on, and then he asks one of the most powerful questions in all the scripture. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Let that sink in. Is anything too hard for the creator of the universe? The one who spoke galaxies into being? He's challenging not just Sarah's doubt, but all human doubt that puts limits on God. He's reminding Abraham and Sarah and all of us that his power isn't bound by our biological clocks, our financial statements, our medical diagnoses, or our perceived limitations. He operates on a completely different level. The Lord then repeats the promise, making it even more specific and undeniable. At the appointed time, I will return to you. About this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. There's no ambiguity. It's a divine appointment. It's on God's calendar. Sarah, overhearing this, gets scared. She was caught. Her private cynical thought was now out in the open, being discussed by God himself. So she does what many of us do when we are caught in a moment of weakness or doubt. She denies Italiano. I did not laugh, she said. But the Lord's reply is simple and final. No, but you did laugh. He doesn't condemn her. He doesn't scold her. He just states the fact, exposing the truth of her heart not to shame her, but to lead her from a place of cynical laughter to a place of future joy. This encounter is a turning point. It's a story about divine visitation in the middle of an ordinary day. It's about radical hospitality opening the door to a supernatural promise, and it's about the collision of human doubt with divine power. Sarah's laughter of disbelief would, 1 year later, be transformed into a laughter of pure, unadulterated joy. She would name her son Isaac, which literally means he laughs, a permanent reminder that God had the last laugh. He turned her cynical chuckle into a baby's cry, her barrenness into fullness, her impossibility into a reality that would bless all nations. This story asks us today, where are we laughing in disbelief? What promises have we given up on? The God who met Abraham and Sarah under the oaks of Mamre is the same God who asks us, is anything too hard for me? Perhaps it is time to stop laughing at the impossibility of the promise and start looking forward to the joy of its fulfillment. Thank you so much for joining me today to explore this incredible story. If it resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into these timeless narratives, and share in the comments below what's a promise you're holding on to today. Have you ever had a conversation with God, not just praying, but a real book and forth, where you felt the weight of every word? I have, and it's a moment that has been etched into my soul for all time. The story, you know, is about my nephew, Lot, and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. But today, I want to take you back to that moment, to stand with me under the oaks of Mamre, and feel what I felt as I stood before the Lord himself. It was the heat of the day. Sarah and I were resting in the shade of our tent when 3 men appeared. I didn't know who they were at first, only that they were travelers, and hospitality demanded I welcome them. I ran to greet them, bowed low, and offered them water, food, and a place to rest their feet. We prepared a feastenderkaf, fresh cakes, milk, and curds. As they ate, one of them spoke. He told me that by this time next year, Sarah would have a son. My Sarah, who had long passed the age of childbearing. Inside the tent, I heard her laugh, a laugh of disbelief mixed with a flicker of long-lost hope. The man knew. He asked, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" And in that moment, a sense of awe washed over me. These were no ordinary men. After they had eaten, they rose to leave. Their faces turned toward the plains, toward Sodom. It was then that the Lord, who was among them, turned to me. It wasn't a question, but a thought shared aloud, as if he were wrestling with his own divine counsel. He said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do?" My heart stopped. He saw me not just as a servant, but as a friend, a partner in his divine plan. He spoke of the covenant, the promise that my descendants would be a great nation, a blessing to all the earth, keepers of justice and righteousness. And then he told me, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah was great. Their sin was so grievous that he was going down to see for himself if the reports were true. The other 2 men, who I now understood to be angels, began their journey down the path toward the city. But I remained, standing before the Lord. A storm of emotions raged within me. Fear, yes, but also a profound sense of responsibility. Down there, in that wicked city, was my nephew, Lot. My brother's son. I had rescued him from kings once before. Could I stand by and do nothing now, as divine judgment loomed? But it was more than just Lot. It was the people, all of them. Sinful, yes. Corrupt, absolutely. But they were still people. Created beings. Was there no one righteous among them? I drew near, my voice trembling but determined. Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? The audacity of it still astounds me. To question the judge of all the earth. But he didn't rebuke me. He listened. What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people in it? The Lord's reply was immediate and filled with a mercy that took my breath away. If I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake. 50. A wave of relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a gnawing doubt. 50. Was that too high a number? Sodom was infamous. I knew its reputation. I had to press on. Now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, though I am nothing but dust and ashes, I began. My humility genuine, my desperation raw. What if the number of the righteous is 5 less than 50? Will you destroy the entire city for lack of 5 people? If I find 45 there, he said, his patience unwavering, I will not destroy it. His answer emboldened me. The fate of thousands hung in the balance of this divine negotiation. I had to keep going. What if only 40 are found there? I asked, my voice gaining a bit of strength, and he answered, for the sake of 40, I will not do it. I could feel the weight of every soul in that city on my shoulders. I was standing in the gap, a bridge between divine justice and human frailty. May the Lord not be angry, but let me speak. What if only 30 can be found there? Again, the same merciful reply. I will not do it if I find 30 there. My mind was racing. How low could I go? How far could I push this grace? Now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, I repeated, my own words a mantra to quell my fear. What if only 20 can be found there? He said, for the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Just one more time. I had to ask one more time. My heart pounded in my chest. This was it. I was haggling for human lives with the Creator of the universe. May the Lord not be angry, but let me speak just once more. What if only 10 are found there? His final answer sealed the conversation, a testament to his incredible patience and mercy. For the sake of 10, he promised, I will not destroy it. 10. Just 10 righteous souls could have saved 2 entire cities. He would spare thousands for the sake of 10. With that, the Lord went on his way, and I returned to my tent. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the land. A heavy silence fell. I had done all I could. I had pleaded. I had bargained. I had stood in the gap. The rest was no longer in my hands. The next morning, I rose early and went back to the place where I had stood before the Lord. I looked out toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the plain. What I saw is an image I will never forget. Dense smoke was rising from the land. Like smoke from a furnace, my heart sank. There were not even 10. But even in that moment of devastation, I saw the hand of God's mercy. The scripture tells you that God remembered Abraham, and because of that memory, he brought Lot out of the catastrophe. My intercession, my desperate plea, was not in vain. It didn't save the city, but it saved my family. It showed me the heart of God, a heart that desires to show mercy, a judge who listens to the pleas of his people, and a Lord who values even a few righteous souls. This experience changed me forever. It taught me the power of intercession, the importance of standing in the gap for others, no matter how far they have fallen. It showed me that our God is a God of justice, but his justice is always tempered with breathtaking mercy. He is willing to listen, willing to relent, searching for any reason to spare. So when you read this story, don't just see the fire and brimstone. See the conversation. See the heart of a man who cared for the lost, and the heart of a God who cared even more. See the power that lies in a single, bold prayer. And ask yourself, for whom are you willing to stand in the gap today? It's a story about promises, about waiting, and about laughter that bursts forth when all hope seems lost. We're talking about Abraham, Sarah, and the miraculous birth of their son, Isaac. Now, to really get the weight of this moment, we have to rewind a bit. Imagine being Abraham. You're 100 years old. A century. Your life has been long, filled with journeys, challenges, and a deep, abiding faith. God has made you a promise, a massive, world-changing promise, that your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. A great nation will come from you. There's just one problem, a pretty significant one. Your wife, Sarah, is 90. She's been by your side through thick and thin, but the one thing you both desired more than anything, a child, never came. In that culture, and honestly in any culture, being childless, especially in old age, carried a heavy weight of sorrow and finality. The dream of a family, of an heir, had long since faded. The biological clock hadn't just ticked, it had stopped decades ago. It's easy for us to read this as just a story, but try to put yourself in their shoes. Decades of hoping, decades of prayers that seemed to go unanswered, decades of watching other families grow, celebrating births, and feeling that sharp pang of longing. They had reached a point where, humanly speaking, it was impossible. Absolutely, unequivocally, scientifically impossible. And then, something extraordinary happens. The Lord, as the scriptures say, visited Sarah, as he had said. This isn't just a casual visit. This is a divine intervention, a keeping of a promise that seemed to have expired. Think about it. God had spoken this promise to Abraham years and years before. There were moments of doubt, moments where they tried to take matters into their own hands. Remember the story of Hagar and Ishmael. That was a human attempt to fulfill a divine promise, and it brought its own set of complications and heartaches. But God's plan was not to be rushed or replaced. His timing is always perfect, even when it feels agonizingly slow to us. And now, at the appointed time, the impossible happens. Sarah, at 90 years old, conceives. Can you even begin to fathom the shock? The disbelief. Remember when the angels first told Abraham this would happen? And Sarah, eavesdropping from the tent, laughed to herself. It wasn't a laugh of joy. It was a laugh of incredulity. Me, an old woman, and my husband is old too. Will I really have this pleasure? It's such a human, relatable reaction. It's the laugh of someone who has given up, who has protected her heart from further disappointment by accepting her reality. But God's reality is bigger than ours. His power isn't limited by our biology, our age, or our skepticism. And so, the time comes. Sarah gives birth to a son. After a lifetime of waiting, a lifetime of barrenness, her arms are finally filled. The tent that had been quiet for so long, marked by a silent sorrow, is now filled with the cries of a newborn baby. Abraham, the 100-year-old man, is a father. This is where the story gets its name and its heart. Sarah, holding her son, declares, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." This time, it's a different kind of laughter. It's not the cynical laugh of doubt. It's the explosive, unrestrained, can't believe it's true laughter of pure joy. It is the laughter that comes when a miracle you've given up on lands right in your lap. It's a shared laughter. She knows that anyone who hears their story, a 90-year-old woman and a 100-year-old man having a baby, will be so astounded they couldn't help but laugh along. It is a testament to the fact that God does things so far beyond our expectations that our only response can be joyful amazement. And so, they named the boy Isaac. In Hebrew, Yitzhak. It means he laughs. His very name is a permanent reminder of this moment. A reminder of Sarah's initial doubt, yes, but more importantly, a reminder of God's faithfulness and the ultimate joy that silenced all doubt. Every time they called his name Isaac, they would be reminded of the laughter of disbelief turned into the laughter of deliverance. Imagine Isaac growing up when he was old enough to ask, "Mom, Dad, why did you name me?" He laughs. They would get to tell him this incredible story. "Son, your existence is a miracle. You are a walking, talking punchline to the greatest joke God ever told on the limitations of human ability. Your name is a testimony to the fact that with God, nothing is impossible." This story is so much more than just an ancient account of a surprising birth. It's a powerful message for every single one of us. How many of us have a dead dream? A promise we feel God has made to us, but so much time has passed that we've given up. Maybe it's a career goal, a desire for reconciliation in a relationship, a hope for healing, or a longing for a family of your own. We reach a point where we think, it's too late. I'm too old. I'm too tired. The opportunity has passed. We laugh that same cynical laugh as Sarah. We accept a reality that seems fixed and unchangeable. The story of Isaac is God's response to that laughter. It's his gentle, powerful reminder that he operates on a different timeline. His promises don't have an expiration date. Your age, your circumstances, the opinions of others. The laws of biology, none of these are barriers to him. He is the God who brings life from death, who opens barren wombs, who makes a way where there is absolutely no way. Abraham's role in this is also crucial. The scripture says, "And I was 100 years old when my son Isaac was born to me." There's a simple, factual power to that statement. It's the anchor of the miracle. It's the impossible fact that frames the entire event. His faith, though it wavered at times, ultimately held on to the promise, and he received the reward of that faith, holding his promised son in his centenarian arms. This isn't about God being a magical genie who grants wishes. It's about a covenant relationship. It's about God's overarching plan for humanity, a plan that would eventually unfold through Isaac's descendants. This wasn't just for Abraham and Sarah. It was for the whole world. But God chose to work out this grand, cosmic plan through the intimate and deeply emotional story of one elderly couple's desire for a child. It shows us that God cares about our personal heartaches and our deepest longings. He sees the empty spaces in our lives, the quiet griefs we carry, and he is a God who specializes in filling them, often in ways we could never predict or engineer on our own. So, what's the takeaway for us today? First, never give up on a promise from God. If you believe God has placed a dream or a calling on your heart, don't let the passage of time or the impossible circumstances make you laugh in disbelief. Hold on. His timing is not our timing. Second, be prepared for God to work in ways that are surprising, maybe even a little bit funny. The birth of Isaac was a world-changing event, but it was also beautifully absurd. A 90-year-old new mom. It's a story that brings a smile to your face. God has a sense of humor, and his miracles often have a flair for the dramatic that leaves us shaking our heads in wonder and laughter. And finally, when God does move, when your miracle arrives, let your laughter be loud. Share your story. Let others laugh with you. Just as Sarah said, everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. Your testimony of God's faithfulness isn't just for you. It's a source of hope and encouragement for everyone else who is still in their waiting period. Your Isaac can inspire someone else to keep believing for theirs. The story of Isaac's birth is a cornerstone of faith, a beautiful picture of God's power and his intimate love for his people. It challenges us to look at the impossible situations in our own lives and ask ourselves, is my God bigger than this? The answer, resounding from a tent in the desert 2,000 years ago, is a joyful, laughing yes. Have you ever faced a decision so difficult, so heart-wrenching, that it felt like it was tearing you apart? A choice where every option seemed wrong, and your heart was caught in the crossfire. I have. My name is Abram, and I want to share a story from my life that tested my faith and my love to their very limits. It was a day that should have been filled with pure joy. My beloved wife, Sarah, and I had finally welcomed our long-awaited son, Isaac. The promise God made to us, the promise of a descendant as numerous as the stars, was finally beginning to unfold. We held a great feast to celebrate his weaning, a milestone marking the end of his infancy and the beginning of his boyhood. The laughter, the music, the scent of roasted lamette was a picture of perfect happiness. But in the midst of this celebration, a shadow fell. Sarah's eyes, which had been so full of light, suddenly darkened. I followed her gaze and saw it too. Ishmael, my firstborn son, the son I had with Hagar, Sarah's handmaiden, was there. But he wasn't celebrating with us. He was mocking, laughing at Isaac, his little brother. Perhaps it was just the rough play of an older boy, a touch of jealousy. But Sarah saw something more. She saw a threat. That night, the festive mood was gone. Sarah came to me, her face a mask of fierce determination and pain. "Cast out this bondwoman and her son," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "The son of this slave will not be heir with my son, with Isaac." Her words hit me like a physical blow. Cast out Hagar, cast out Ishmael. My son, the boy I had watched grow, the one who had brought me so much joy in the long years of waiting for Isaac. The thing was grievous in my sight. My heart cried out in protest. How could I do such a thing? To send a woman and a young boy out into the unforgiving wilderness with nothing. It felt cruel, impossible. Ishmael was my seed, my own flesh and blood. My soul was in turmoil. On one hand, I had my wife, the mother of the promised child, her heart pierced by fear for her son's future. On the other, my firstborn son, innocent in his own way, caught in a destiny he did not choose. I spent that night in prayer, my spirit wrestling with this impossible demand. I laid my broken heart before the Lord, pleading for guidance, for another way. And in the quiet of my tent, God spoke to me. His voice was not one of condemnation, but of gentle understanding. "Let it not be grievous in your sight because of the lad, and because of your bondwoman," he said. My heart steadied, listening to the one voice that had never led me astray. "In all that Sarah has said to you," God continued, "listen to her voice, for in Isaac shall your seed be called." This was the confirmation, the covenant, the grand promise that would lead to a great nation and eventually the salvation of mankind, was to pass through Isaac. The line had to be protected, kept pure from conflict and rivalry. It was a divine clarification, a painful but necessary pruning of my family tree. But God, in his infinite mercy, did not forget my other son. He saw the grief in my heart for Ishmael, and also of the son of the bondwoman I will make a nation, because he is your seed. A wave of relief washed over me, a comfort in the midst of my sorrow. Ishmael would not be abandoned. He would not perish in the desert. God himself promised to watch over him, to make him the father of a great nation, all because he was my son. The divine plan was larger than my personal feelings, larger than my immediate family drama. It was a plan for all of humanity, spanning generations. My role was not to understand every detail, but to trust and obey, even when it hurt. God wasn't asking me to stop loving Ishmael. He was asking me to entrust him, and Hagar, into his own loving, powerful hands. He was showing me that his provision and his promises extend beyond what I can see or control. So, with a heavy heart, but a resolute spirit, I rose early the next morning. The desert air was cool and still. I gathered bread and a skin of water, a meager provision, but a symbol of my lingering care. I placed them on Hagar's shoulder, along with the boy, and sent them away. Watching them walk toward the horizon, two small figures shrinking into the vast emptiness of the wilderness of Beersheba, was the hardest thing I have ever done. A part of my own heart walked away with them. I didn't know then how God would save them, how an angel would appear when their water was spent, how a well would spring forth from the dry ground. I didn't know that Ishmael would grow up to be a skilled archer, a man of the wilderness, and the father of 12 princes, just as God had promised. All I had in that moment was God's word and the raw, aching wound in my soul. This experience taught me a profound lesson about faith. Faith is not just about believing in blessings and miracles. It's about trusting God in the midst of heartbreak. It's about obeying his command even when it goes against every fatherly instinct you have. It's about letting go, surrendering your own plans, your own children, into the hands of a God who sees the bigger picture and whose love is far greater than your own. Sometimes, God's path for us requires separation and sacrifice. It requires us to make choices that are deeply painful, but are necessary for the fulfillment of his ultimate promise. My story is a reminder that even in our most grievous moments, God is there. He hears the cry of the father, the mother, and the child. He makes a way where there seems to be no way. He doesn't just promise a future for the child of promise, but also provides for the child of the flesh. His grace is sufficient for every broken heart. If you are facing an impossible choice today, a situation that is grievous in your sight, I encourage you to bring it to God. Lay your turmoil and your tears at his feet. Listen for his voice. He may not remove the pain of the choice, but he will give you the strength to walk through it, and he will prove himself faithful not just to you, but to all those you are forced to release into his care. My obedience was not easy, but it solidified my path and set in motion a history that continues to unfold to this day. And in his sovereign plan, God showed me that even out of our greatest pains, he can bring forth life and build nations. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of faith. The dust of Beersheba coated everything. My throat, my skin, the thin fabric of my clothes. It was a wilderness, vast and empty, and we were lost in it. The sun beat down, a merciless hammer against the anvil of the sky. Abraham had sent us away. Just a little bread, a skin of water, and a push into the unknown. He had turned his back, and the home I knew vanished behind me. My son, Ishmael, stumbled beside me. His small hand, once so warm and full of life, was now limp in mine. He was so young, so full of laughter and mischief just days ago. Now, his face was pale, his lips cracked and dry. The water was gone. The last drop had moistened his tongue hours ago. Now, the leather skin was as dry and brittle as my own heart. He stumbled again, this time his legs giving way completely. He didn't cry out. He didn't have the strength. He just looked at me, his eyes wide with a question I couldn't answer, a silent plea that tore me apart. I couldn't carry him. I could barely carry myself. The weight of my despair was heavier than any child. With a sob that felt like it was ripping from my very soul, I found a small shrub, one of the few signs of life in this desolate land. Its shade was pathetic, a mere suggestion of relief, but it was all I had. Gently, I laid Ishmael down beneath its sparse leaves. I couldn't bear it. I couldn't watch him fade away. The thought of witnessing his last breath was a torment worse than the thirst, worse than the searing heat. Primera. Hawaii Hawaii. Maybe a bowshot's distance, far enough that I wouldn't have to see the final, terribly moment. I collapsed onto the sand, the grit scraping my knees, and I lifted my voice. It wasn't a prayer. Not at first. It was a raw, primal scream of grief. A torrent of anguish directed at the empty sky. Let me not see the death of my child, I wailed, the words tearing from my raw throat. I wept. I wept for my son, for myself, for the promise that had turned to dust in this wilderness. My tears were the only water left, and they were bitter with sorrow. The silence that followed my cries was profound. It was a silence that echoed with finality. The world seemed to hold its breath. And then, a voice, not from the earth, not from the horizon, but from everywhere at once. It was a voice that cut through my grief like a sharp, clean blade. Hagar, I froze. Was I imagining it? Was the heat finally addling my mind? What troubles you, Hagar? The voice continued, gentle but firm. It was the angel of God. I knew it, somehow. The presence was unmistakable, a power that calmed the frantic beating of my heart. Do not be afraid. Fear not. How could I not fear? My son was dying. We were abandoned. Hope was a forgotten memory. God has heard the voice of the boy from where he is, the angel said, and those words shifted everything. God had heard Ishmael, not my wailing, not my despair, but the silent, suffering voice of my child. He was not forgotten. He was not abandoned. He was heard. A new strength, not my own, flowed into my limbs. Arise, the voice commanded. Lift up the boy and hold him by the hand, for I will make of him a great nation. A great nation. From a boy on the brink of death, in the middle of nowhere. The idea was so impossible, so fantastically absurd, that it broke through the fog of my despair. It was a promise. A wild, unbelievable promise hanging in the blistering air. A future for Ishmael. I pushed myself up, my body still weak, but my spirit ignited by this impossible hope. I turned back toward the shrub where I had left my son to die, and as I did, something changed. It was as if a veil was lifted from my eyes. The landscape, which had been a blur of sand and sun, came into sharp focus, and there, just a few feet from where I had collapsed in my grief, was a well of water. It wasn't a mirage. The stone coping was real. The dark circle of water within was real. It had been there all along. I had been so blinded by my tears, so consumed by my sorrow, that I hadn't seen it. I had been sitting beside our salvation, weeping for want of it. I scrambled to the well, my hands shaking as I lowered the empty water skin. I filled it, the sound of the gurgling water the most beautiful music I had ever heard. I ran back to Ishmael, my heart pounding with a wild, joyful rhythm. I lifted his head and poured the cool, life-giving water over his lips. He coughed, then drank. Weakly at first, then with more urgency. Color began to return to his cheeks. His eyes fluttered open and found mine, and in them, I saw not a dying child, but the first flicker of a great nation. I held him close, my tears falling again, but this time they were not tears of grief. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude. We were not forsaken. In our darkest moment, when all seemed lost, God had seen us. He had heard us, and he had opened my eyes. He didn't just provide water. He reminded me that even in the most barren wilderness, he's a God who sees, a God who hears, and a God who provides. From that day on, I knew we would survive. My son would live, and he would thrive, not because of my strength, but because of the promise whispered in the dust of Beersheba.